Welcome to the Christian Chronicles, Volume 2, Africa. But first, what's the name? 60 years ago, the time of this story, most of Africa was still controlled by European nations. Independence was just beginning to be a possibility. Rhodesia was a British protectorate. The Methodist Church was active in southern Rhodesia. You can see Old Umtali, where Mom was, on the map. In 1980, Rhodesia gained independence from Britain and split into two countries. Northern Rhodesia became Zambia, southern Rhodesia became Zimbabwe, and its capital, Salisbury, became Mutare. At the same time, Umtali became Mutare, and Old Umtali, the mission station 20 miles away, became Old Mutare. The Methodist Church was also active in Angola, a Portuguese colony, and the Belgian Congo, administered by Belgium. Since the Congo gained independence in 1960, it has a bloody history of turmoil and chaos, not unlike most of Africa. From 1971 to 1997, the country was known as Zaire. It became the Democratic Republic of the Congo in 1997, although the word democratic is relative. The Elizabethville that Dad knew is now known as Kinshasa. To help keep it straight during this story, Wilma is my mother, Jim is my dad, Ann is my grandmother, and Herman is my grandpa. Okay, you ready? Let's go. Mom and Dad were prolific journalers and photographers. These records are a treasure trove of detail. My task was to sort through it and find the thread that connected these very different stories. Dad was in Africa almost 2 years before Mom arrived. His job was to document, and he did. His parents came a year after their son, and Mom arrived a few months after that. Arizona where the pioneer spirit of his parents was still possible. He hunted, fished, rode horses, and was active in the Central Phoenix Methodist Church. He and his dad were early adopters. They were among the first users of the new technology of taking motion pictures. During his first year in seminary at Boston University, Jim became friends with Newell Booth Jr., whose father, Newell Booth Sr., was the Methodist bishop for all of Africa. Newell Booth was looking for a private secretary, and Dad was offered a 3-year stint. On June 27, 1948, Jim and his good friend Gail Kernahan flew from Phoenix to New York on a DC-3 with stops in Albuquerque, Amarillo, and Kansas City. He spent 2 days in New York, and on June 30th, he was on the Belgian liner Vinkt. With a brief stop on the Cape Verde Islands, and the traditional hazing on board ship for people crossing the equator for the first time, he arrived at Matadi, the town on the mouth of the Congo River, on July 15th. These are videos Dad took at Matadi. Okay, we have Dad in Africa. Now we have to get Grandma and Grandpa there. Herman was a successful building contractor in Phoenix. He built Elizabeth Arden's first day spa, the Main Chance, among many other buildings as Phoenix grew. But they missed their son. Herman's skills were very welcomed by the Board of Missions, and in August 1949 they packed up their car and their dog and boarded the ship to Cape Town, South Africa.
Now these are pictures that my dad and mom took on board a British passenger ship from New York.
These are actual photographs taken of Ann and Herman. The archivist at the now United Methodist Global Board of Missions sent them to me because they're still there. Ann and Herman drove their car from Cape Town, South Africa to Old Umtali, the mission station. It took some doing, as you can tell, but they arrived. Okay, now we have Dad, Grandma, and Grandpa in Africa. Now we have to get Mom over there. Wilma was born and raised in Cairo, Michigan. The oldest of 4 girls, her father worked in the local sugar beet factory. I'm going to let her tell you how she got to Africa.
Mother was so active in the Methodist Church. I followed suit and became a state active in the Methodist Youth Fellowship, league at that time. They were going to be offering a program for people who might desire to be a missionary and gave us a choice of going to Africa or India or some other places for 3 years. And as I was undecided as to what I wanted to do with my life, I decided that this is just the ticket for me to give it a try and see whether it was suited me or not.
And so, the day after Thanksgiving, 1949, off Mom went, taking the train from Cairo to New York City. She spent a week there, seeing the Rockettes and Hayden Planetarium and meeting with the Board of Missions people. Wilma boarded the Queen Elizabeth and sailed across the Atlantic to Southampton. She spent a week in London, squired by Wallace, a young minister from Belfast, Ireland, that she had met on the ship and who had fallen for her. As her journal said, he was a fine-looking Irishman, too, with graying hair and a small clipped mustache, which I think he can wear. He was dressed sportily, was very helpful when asked, and he was just all in all a person I should like to know. But what could I do? She made me promise not to say more. She left him there and continued on sailing, enduring that shipboard hazing and getting to Cape Town, South Africa. Wilma spent Christmas Eve on the train from Cape Town to Umtali. Her journal documents the big drunken party that she was involved in with Patty, but that's another thing. She arrived at Umtali on December 27th, 1949. Okay, we have Jim, Wilma, Ann, and Herman all in Africa. Jim traveled with the bishop throughout the Belgian Congo, the Portuguese colonies of Angola and Mozambique, Rhodesia, South Africa, and Liberia. These are a few of the missions Jim visited, although he was based at Lake Mukamba. Education was the focus of the Methodist missions in Africa. Most of the men who came to power after independence in several of the countries, both good and bad, were educated at various missions, including Nelson Mandela. Besides being the confidential secretary to the bishop, Jim was also the official photographer for the Board of Missions. It was important to validate the mission work for the supporters back home. All of this film is currently in the archives of the Board of Missions in New York.
So the women here are carrying the cassava into the forest.
Dad drove thousands of miles over sand and dirt and muddy roads, often in driving rain, occasionally through veldt fires. This is crossing the ferry. That's the bishop that's driving the car, and that's Bishop Springer who's guiding him on. They did that like for 50 years. And since Dad is taking these pictures, I'm going to assume that he had already ridden over like that. Anne is going to teach there at Old Umtali. Look at those great shoes. And Herman is building. He's already built homes, schools, and other buildings, but the big one is the church. He designs the church at Old Umtali and sets to building it.
And nobody in Africa had ever heard of adobes before, so then my dad brought his good old southwestern skills to bear making adobes. And so he built houses and school buildings out of adobes. First time in Africa.
This is the entrance to the old mission station at Old Umtali. It is now called the Old Mutare Center. Wilma lived at the Fairfield housing. It is now a Fairfield children's home. She taught all her classes. She bought a sun helmet and marveled at the grace of the African women. She was settling into life at Old Umtali. These are a few of the other teachers there who Mom was friends with. And this is Mabel, who became Mom's lifelong friend. According to her journal, on January 1st, 1950, she attended church groundbreaking. Mr. Christian, as the builder of the church, said a few words and then introduced Reverend Springer, who turned the first spade. Anne and Herman were looking forward to their son visiting them at Old Umtali. In the few months since he'd been there, a new teacher had arrived, and Anne and Herman had had dinner with her several times. Wilma and Jim met on March 11, 1950. Although she wasn't impressed at their first meeting, things changed rapidly. Jim asked Wilma to marry him on April 21st, and she said yes.
This is Zimbabwe ruins. Probably the first pictures that Wilma and I ever had taken together. I haven't been updated on the Zimbabwe ruins in recent years. I think they've done some very extensive archaeological work, and I think they know pretty much what the history of ruins was, but I have not updated myself. It was, I believe, a slave hold and a trading post.
This is their official picture at their engagement party. What I'd like you to notice are the Indian artifacts in the back, because to all of us who have grown up with them, this is where they came from. After the engagement, Mom's journals start including all four of them, and Dad doesn't write anymore. He just keeps right on taking pictures, though. The four of them went camping a lot. They traveled all over Africa together. They went shopping. Oh, God, I wish I had some of those. Here is, I think Grandpa's making change right here. And this is a picture of the piano. It doesn't quite look like this anymore. There were just too many show and tells, but that's where it came from. And we all know the story of the python. That's a long python, and here's Mom with it. Only a handler could do this, of course. I think it was after it was already dead when he was handling this. And here's the skin, and we know where the skin is at Mom's house, where it belongs. They went, there's Dad with the monkey. I think that was taken at Mozambique. Here's Mom. They went to the Mozambique National Park, and I just love this set of pictures. Meanwhile, Grandpa is still building the church, but it's only like half built, and everybody is planning the wedding, and so Mom and Dad decide to get married in the church when it was half built. And here are some pictures of it. Bishop Booth is presiding over the ceremony, and you can see the walls. And this is a really great view of the back of the church. You can tell we had a ways to go with it still. And there's Mabel. She was Mom's maid of honor. I included this picture mostly because Mom's laughing, and that's how I look when I laugh. So that's where I got it. They were an absolutely beautiful young couple. And they went to Victoria Falls after that. And these were absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous pictures of Victoria Falls, I thought. I don't think it, I'd love to see it one day. And these are pictures that Dad took of Mom. I took them right out of his book. I just thought they were absolutely exquisite. Meanwhile, Grandpa is still building the church. Building this church was important because in the 50 years since Cecil Rhodes had donated this land to the Methodist Church for Old Umtali mission, a real church had not been built. The focus had been on education, with the Central Primary School where Mom taught, the theological school, now Africa University, hospitals and orphanages. So this church was very important to the mission community, which at that time was about 1,000 people. Jim created the rose stained glass window that is going to be in the church, high up in the sanctuary. These are pictures of its development. And this is a picture of Dad after it was finally installed. It's really beautiful. The Ehnes Memorial Methodist Church was dedicated April 1st, 1950. This is right from Mom's journal. She has the original. If you look closely, you can see mention of both Grandpa and Dad. The church was named after the first missionary who came to Rhodesia, the Reverend Morris Ehnes, who arrived in Umtali in 1899. "60 years later, is the church still there?" I found a gentleman named Lloyd Nairota who works for the United Methodist Church in Mutare, and he spent a day out there at Old Umtali or Old Mutare taking pictures of me. The church is still there. The stained glass window is still there. And there you go. Africa 60 years ago was a real adventure, a once-in-a-lifetime experience, a unique slice in time before technology changed the way the world communicates. This African experience impacted all 4 of these people for the rest of their lives, as well as every single one of you. I hope you enjoyed it. In May of 1951, the 4 Christians left for the United States via Cairo and Europe. It was another adventure that was only possible 60 years ago, but that is a story left to another time.